Hey guys, this is Carola Guerrero with the Latin Times, and as you know, we've been covering the topic of deportations under the Trump administration for the last few months. And during this time, we have been seeing a lot of cases of undocumented people who had businesses, homes, had been in the US for decades, who have been just deported out of the country or being held in detention centers, leaving family members behind. We've also seen cases of legal residents being detained and in deportation proceedings, or people being taken away their legal protections after an executive order. So this has created a lot of fear, especially for people who have assets in the United States, houses, businesses, savings, kids who are US citizens. So, what can we do to protect all of these things if we fear we are going to be deported? Today, I am being joined by Claudia Cobreiro. She's a business attorney and she's very generously taking some time out of her day to give us some quick tips on, what are the fastest and easiest ways that we can protect our assets if we do fear deportation. So let's get to it. Can you just tell us, worst case scenario, what happens to a person's assets when they are deported and they have not taken any actions to protect said assets? What happens to those?
Ultimately, the assets continue to exist and the assets continue to be theirs. The issue becomes who has control of the assets or a right to do something with the assets if the person who owns them or is entitled to them is not physically here, right? The reality is that financial obligations associated with assets do not stop because we are deported or detained. And all of the benefits also do not stop if we are deported or detained, right? The thing is that many times these assets, when we're talking about businesses and real estate, for example, properties, technically require us to sign for different things. They require us to take control in different ways. And so, in the event that we're not here and unable to do that, our family may end up in limbo or may end up in a situation in which they need court intervention to appoint or give someone the power to do certain things on our behalf, right? But if we are able to plan ahead and if we are able to financially invest in a contingency plan, then we are able to appoint someone to do that on our behalf in the event that we're not here. I'll give you the example of anyone who owns a property, a house. If you own a house and you are the one that is entitled to that property, you normally are the one that's on the mortgage and you're the only one that can call your mortgage with questions. If there's a change in, for example, your escrow account that causes a change in your monthly payment and you want to clarify, or if you have an issue with your payment not being applied, you are the only one the bank will talk to. They will not talk to anybody else. However, if you get a document in place that's called a durable power of attorney, it is a document that basically allows someone else to become you for legal purposes. That person can sign on your behalf, can act on your behalf in a number of different ways, which the document specifies in order to take your place and take your actions, whatever those may be. The durable power of attorney is a very powerful tool for these situations. It is one of the recommendations that we are making to our clients who are living in a time of a little bit of uncertainty, right? Of what can happen and if it will happen. Obviously, nothing may happen, but there is no worse plan than failure to plan. And so by having a document like this one already in place, it gives someone else the ability to continue their affairs here, regardless of them being deported or detained.
So, if you do get deported and you don't have this protection or any other protection, and you do have to sign papers and you do have to pay taxes or whatever debt you have, you risk losing those assets. That's a very real.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
Does it
for
happen a
example,
lot?
historically, it has occurred. It just has not occurred frequently because we have not had a situation like this happen so widespreadly.
Mhm.
in the last few years. But of course, I have clients that get deported for different reasons with and without cause. And they're deported, but they had a property here. They lived here for many years. Some clients leave behind family members, sometimes children that are American citizens that are now adults and can continue to work to pay the property. And sometimes they leave behind no family members and they are, for example, unable to rent the property, or they decide that they want to sell the property to liquidate that asset. But there's a million different scenarios that we can discuss that I see day to day in my practice. In most cases, people, at least, in my experience, have the hope that someday they will be able to come back, right? They don't believe that they're gone and they will never be able to return. They believe that maybe in the future they'll be able to return under a different program or whatever the case may be. And so what I see most frequently is that they try to have family members continue to run their business or continue to live in their property as long as they're able to get a financial, benefit from it. So maybe the family members pay the mortgage and they use the property in the meantime, or maybe the business continues to give them some sort of earnings despite them not physically being here. Some jobs you can do online nowadays, right? Sometimes you can support the business administratively, from whatever country. Sometimes your labor is what is the business and it's not worth it. Sometimes it's better to sell the business. So it's a very case by case analysis that we do as to what is the right thing for that client based on the circumstances. But for example, if the client has no family members here and does not have someone who can rent the property on their behalf, or nobody has the legal power or authority to do that, if the property does not get paid, it will get foreclosed, whether they're here or not, the same way that when you're here and you don't pay your property, you get foreclosed on.
And for example, I have also been reading about the subject, and some experts have been recommending also putting the assets under an LLC.
So you brought up a very good point. When it comes to assets such as a business, it is an option or a property to put it under an LLC and maybe have someone else that can sign on behalf of that LLC. But if that asset or that property or that business is run under a personal name, I would argue that doing the things you have to do to move those assets into an LLC and create the paperwork that you have to create for someone else to have that authority is more complicated and more expensive than just a durable power of attorney. The durable power of attorney kind of covers all of your bases when it comes to assets. But you mentioned another very important point, which is family and children, right? The durable power of attorney does not really do what you need it to do when it comes to minor children. We normally don't see a situation like this when it comes to minor children in day-to-day practice, right? The reality is that when we think of our minor children and the documents that we can leave, they generally are documents that are a part of an estate plan for when we are no longer on earth, right? When we're no longer here. But in this case, it's a very unique situation because a document like a pre-need guardian is a document that we can fill out and sign where we tell the court, if I'm not here, normally in the event of death, right? I would want my sister to be the one to have, authority over my children, right? And that document in these cases can be used to argue that at least temporarily, you need a guardianship. A guardianship is a court action where someone that is not the parent of the child gets legal and physical custody over that child, right? And so in these cases, we're seeing, for example, parents being deported or detained who have minor children. And so what we're doing is we're filing guardianships, at least temporary guardianships for the time being, asking the court to temporarily appoint whoever that person designated in the pre-need guardianship form as the guardian for the child, because of the fact that the parent is physically here but detained or is physically abroad and unable to return. Initially, we believe those actions are temporary, again, with the hope that the parent will eventually come back. But the truth is some parents decide to bring their children to wherever they are, despite the fact that the children are American citizens. But sometimes, at least temporarily, the parent is not able to return, and the intention is for an aunt or a close family friend to keep that child. Without that pre-need guardianship form, the court normally appoints the next of kin. Anybody with a blood relationship to that child, the closer the better. But if that relationship of next of kin does not exist, or if no one is willing to step in, the child could end up in the custody of the state. And so, although assets are important and, the durable power of attorney is very useful, I would almost argue that the pre-need guardian is more important to ensure that your children will be taken care of and will be with someone that, is willing to take on that responsibility, especially if they do not have any immediate family members here in the States.
Yeah, so if you don't have someone in that space, it's important to look for it if you think you might be deported.
And have those conversations, right? Because, leaving a child with someone is a very big responsibility. And so, in the event that you don't have a sister, like me and Carla, absolutely, you would be the one, then maybe, the closest family friend to say, hey, look, I hope this doesn't happen. But if it does happen, I'm putting paperwork in place that would make you the person that's responsible. Is that a responsibility that you're willing to take on? Because, it's not an obligation. But when the time comes, the court will almost always appoint the person that we designate in that pre-need guardianship form, unless that guardian somehow has a history of abuse to children, criminal activity, or financial crimes, because they will have the, control over the assets of that minor child. And so ultimately, it is a delicate situation and something that should not be taken lightly, but that needs to be discussed and planned ahead for.
Are you seeing a rise in these types of cases nowadays?
Absolutely, absolutely. I can say specifically since last week. I have been getting numerous phone calls to my office for these types of issues. Like Carla said, I do not do immigration law, but I handle matters regarding family law, businesses, and real estate. And many of my clients have called me saying, what happens if, or some of my referral partners are getting those questions and they call me to be able to answer their clients' questions. So much so that last Friday I did an Instagram live with one of my referral partners, because last Thursday I spent the entire day having these conversations, repeating myself over and over again. So I said, let's make it an Instagram live. And now when someone calls me, I just send them the video on Instagram where we discuss basically some of these things, how they can be used, and how you can plan ahead for a situation like what's going on right now.
And for example, if you already got deported, is there something you can do outside of the country?
Absolutely. So sometimes we can prepare the durable power of attorney form and have it sent to wherever that client is electronically. And then that client sometimes can go to a US embassy is ideal, depending on where they're located and if an embassy is an option. In some countries, the notary will notarize the document. In some countries, the notary will not notarize it if it's not in Spanish. So it really is country dependent. The durable power of attorney is generally only executed in its original form in person. Despite the fact that now in Florida, for example, we have a lot of advances with online notarization, that is one document that normally can only be presented and used if it's an original. And so that is the inconvenience that we have in the client waiting until they're in that position to want to do these forms, because they really should be signed in person. And then depending on the territory that they end up in, it may not be easy to have that document signed and notarized. The beauty of that document is, since it's only effective in its original form, I can sign that document, I can have it ready and never give it to that person because I don't have the need, and that person will never have the power. The same way, I can always ask for the original back and shred it, and the power doesn't exist because it's not an original. So what I normally recommend for my clients in these circumstances is that they prepare the document, that they have it notarized, and that they keep it in a safe place where if something happens to them, they can say, hey, Carla, or hey, Carola, go to my closet in X space, and you're going to find a document that's going to give you the powers that you need. And that way, at that point, when that person has that document, it's that they can do whatever it is that you want them to do.
And if you don't have a person you trust, you can grant the power of attorney to your attorney.
You can. I think many attorneys stay away from that because of the liability, right? So it's not, I don't love to be my client's powers of attorney, and if I do, then, it costs my client money every time I do something versus if it's, just a family friend or someone that they trust. So it is an option, but it's not a popular option because of how it costs money every time we do something. And also because attorneys for liability purposes try to stay away from that if there's anybody else that they would feel comfortable with appointing instead.
And what is the next best option if you don't have anybody to grant a power of attorney?
I think it would be an attorney. I think if you don't have like a very close family friend or a family member or a spouse, a lot of times we're seeing, 18 and 19-year-olds being appointed, which, really an 18 or 19-year-old doesn't know a lot about the world, right? Many kids don't have a ton of experience, but to act on behalf of their family, it is the most prudent given the circumstances. However, yes, I think an attorney would be the next most reliable person if somebody like that did not exist.
And I'm just thinking about me, about like all of my important I just organized them and I discovered that they were just everywhere and some, were like kind of lost, but not. I guess it's important to have them in one place where anyone can look for them and find them and classify them.
That is precisely the recommendation. A lot of people like to keep them in banks in a safety deposit box, and that's good and bad because if something happens to you, I can't go to the bank and ask to access your safety deposit box. So having them there is almost like useless, right? There, I'm sure, could be a judicial process in which we get a court order to access it, but imagine the time and the money, right? So my recommendation to my clients is your immediate family members that live with you should all have one place in your house where you have extremely important documents. In the event of an emergency, a fire, or a personal emergency, a death, go to this place, look through the documents. Everything is there, especially certain documents that need to be originals, like a durable power of attorney, a will, a last will and testament is another document that should be an original. There's ways around it if we don't have the physical original, but those documents should all be in one place in your house where the immediate family knows that if something happens, go here, and then they may find whatever they find. Some people don't like to tell other people what the documents are, what they say, what they're for, but the day that something happens and they go there, they find that they have certain things that they need, or they figure out what they're getting or what they're not getting, depending on what the dynamic is. But it is very important to leave them in an accessible place and to leave them all together or to leave them organized so that whoever comes behind can do something with them. Because if you have them and nobody finds them, it's the same as not having them.
Of course. Yeah, and I guess just letting people know that being prepared is the best way you can maybe channel fear of being
Absolutely.
deported. No?
It is, I find that it is the one of the little ways in which you can take control of a situation in which you feel you have lost control, right? That you have no control over the external factors and what may occur, but you can take control of how you go about that situation if you do end up in that situation. And I find that ultimately it does give my clients a level of peace of mind. Obviously, they're still going to be upset. They're still hoping it's not them. And if that situation does happen to them for different reasons, it will still be uncomfortable and, emotional, but they will have, at least a plan in place for their family members or their loved ones to be able to have some continuity despite the disruption in that dynamic.
Of course. Is there anything else we should touch, Claudia, when it comes to preparedness and asset protection?
I mean, this is the bare minimum in an emergency situation like this, but an estate plan can be very basic and it can be very detailed. And the reality is that there is no one size fits all recommendation. And so everyone should always consult with an attorney regarding their particular circumstance so that the attorney can best advise them as to how to address any concerns or how to accomplish any individual goals. But generally, in a situation like what we're discussing now, I think that the durable power of attorney and the pre-need guardian for minor children are two documents that everyone should try to get in place in this situation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Claudia, for your time and sharing your expertise with us.
No problem. Thanks, Carol. I really
Bye.
appreciate it.